Hey, cheers guys, I'm the Tech Prepper. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to do a video I did not think I was ever going to do, and that is another video on the Yaesu FT-891. We're going to do some digital data modes, and we're going to take a look at a new product by DigiRig called the DR-891. And this thing absolutely is changing this radio for me. This was typically relegated to a box. In fact, you guys will notice there is no pack frame on this guy. There's no man pack, and that's because I have been trying to sell the 891 for a while. Now, there's a few things I still don't like about this radio. Maybe we'll get into that later, but this little guy changes things. You know what the heck, let's talk a little bit about the 891 and the experience I've had with it. So this was the second radio I bought. I bought it after the 818ND. I had a hard time getting into low power or QRP radio operations with the 818. I bought this one. This wasn't the radio I wanted. I wanted the 857D, which is discontinued. It's roughly the same size and footprint and weight as this guy. And I bought it, and I had a real hard time getting into digital data modes with it. I tried the Signal Link USB, which I did get working after some time. I think I even covered it on one of my videos a few years back. Got it to work a little bit, and then I finally got my hands on an 857D and pretty much stopped using this. Got really used to the menu system on the 818, 857, 897D. This radio has a completely different menu system, which I don't care for, but revisiting it, I'm actually finding it's not as bad as I thought it was. Still not my favorite. But anyways, that's kind of the history. This used to be kind of my higher power radio at the very beginning, and I also used it initially for a lot of like WinLink operation on the digital side of the house. So I tried a whole bunch of different ways to interface this with a computer. At least 2 years ago, I switched over to using the DigiRig appliances or devices from Denis, and have basically put that on every single radio. The one cool thing about the DigiRig is that at least the models that I've used in the past, you basically invest once in the DigiRig, and then you just swap out the cables, whether you're working with an HT like a Baofeng or an FT-60 or a VX6, or moving over to like the 857 or 818 behind me. So that was really nice. Unfortunately for this guy, the DigiRig was never a good fit, and here's why. So I don't know why Yaesu did this, but they broke convention with how the cabling used to work and the ports on the back. So for the 891, they went with USB for the cat control, so the ability to control this with a computer. But then they still stuck with the 6-pin mini DIN for getting audio in and out. This posed a problem for the traditional DigiRig device, specifically for me and how I want to use it, mostly because you could not use the cat control interface on the DigiRig because you had to use the onboard version. Now, when I plugged that in, I basically had two cat control devices kind of presented to the computer. The first was the onboard one using this USB, and then the unused serial interface for cat control on the traditional DigiRig. So for me, it turned out to be a non-starter, and I kind of, again, put this unit away. Now, Denis has done something pretty cool here with this new DR-891. Now, this is a different DigiRig than the rest. You actually need, it comes as one unit. When you purchase this, it basically has the actual DigiRig hardware and then the cables that go with it. These cables are a little bit different. You'll notice here that we get the 6-pin mini DIN, but we also get a USB cable. And the genius of what he did here is that when you plug in the USB cable here to the back, we plug in the 6-pin mini DIN. So the serial is red, black is audio. The actual USB interface coming out of the radio is just a pass-through. So now when I basically take my single USB cable and plug this into the computer, there's only one device detected for doing cat control. So the DigiRig completely is just taking this as a pass-through into the computer, and then you get the audio interface. So I want to really be clear here. The DR-891, in terms of the actual DigiRig itself that comes with this package, this one is specifically designed for the Yaesu FT-891. So why is this important? Well, number one, The field computers I use, like the FZ-M1 Panasonic tablets, those only have one USB interface, so I needed something like this. In the past, when I had the cat control cable coming out of here and then was also using the DigiRig but only for audio, I had to deal with two USB cables. I tried doing the hub. I got this cable mess. Long story short, the reason why this guy is not in a man pack is because for all of those reasons, since I am primarily a digital data mode operator, I had to basically put this in the box. In fact, I tried to sell it about 3 different times but had no takers. So I'm glad it didn't sell, because this thing now changes this radio for me. So I was debating whether or not this would be an appropriate conversation to have with the context of this video, and that's how I personally configure this radio. There are a lot of different ways to configure this radio for digital operation. There's a little bit of misinformation depending on where you go, but I think that is largely due to the fact how some people get something to work and stick with it. So the way that I'm going to present how I configure this is in the context of me working towards a system that gets me closer to running this as an appliance. So I'm only going to be looking at Linux, specifically Ubuntu Linux, but I'm also going to walk you through the settings here. And then for the Buy Me a Coffee guys, the guys who support me and really make all of this happen, I've got 6 field cards I've put together that walk through everything I need to know about this. So let's pause there for a second. This radio for me is very much going to be a backup radio. In fact, I'm going to be giving this radio to my brother-in-law to hold for me in a basically a go bag for me with some other goodies like a pew pew and some cash and maybe some gift cards, credit cards. Anyways, long story short, this is not going to be my primary radio, and as such, I'm not going to be able to operate this probably 3 months or even maybe next month without this little cheat sheet I put together for myself. And it gives me everything I need to do basic operations and get up and running on digital. So anyways, what I want to do is kind of walk through how I'm going to configure this radio, how I'm going to configure it for Linux, and how I can integrate it with JSA call. All right, like I said, I'm not a big fan of the menu system, but I guess it all depends on where you started when you first got your first radio and what you feel comfortable with. So number one, I started with a factory reset. So I'm only going to cover the settings that I'm changing from factory. That's how I typically like to write up my field cards. So first up, I've got some basic operations that walk you through how to set it up for data. But the first thing we're going to do is configure the global menu settings. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and do a long press of the F key here, and then the first field card is my digital settings, and I have the absolute minimum settings. So we're going to go first to menu 506, and for this guy, it's the cat rate for the computer and the radio to talk to each other. Now I keep mine at 38,400, and I also make sure that's the setting that I'm going to be using, but the software will show in a second. Next up is the timeout timer. I found 100 milliseconds to be good, just in case a command takes a little bit long to run. It gives it time to respond, but not too long. Next up is menu 508, and this one is the cat RTS. That needs to be set to disabled. Based on how I have the DigiRig set up for this, we're actually not going to use the RTS signal. Let's see, next up is menu 801, and this one is important. So for data mode, you want that set to others. PSK tone, actually the next 3 settings I believe are all going to be set to 1500 Hertz. So PSK tone, other DS or other display, and then other shift, all set to 1500 Hertz. For data lower cutoff frequency, set that to off. We don't want it to taper off on the end if you have signals coming in at the bottom of the band or at the top. So that is menu 805. I left the slope set to the default, and then data H-cut frequency, that's menu 807, also have that set to off as well. All right, then 809. This is basically which data port we want to use, set it to rear, because we're obviously using the rear connector for the DigiRig interface into the computer. So 810 data PTT select, set that to DAKY, and then menu 811, this is basically the default of the data output level. I've never had an issue keeping it at 50. Now data BFO, I set that one to upper sideband, all digital data mode operation, regardless of the band plan, whether you're like on 20 meters or 40 and below, is always upper sideband. It does not follow the convention of a voice, so set that to USB. All right, so the last one up here is menu 1107, and that is SSB BFO. I always set that one to auto, and I actually control when I want to go into data mode operation. So one field card basically has all of these settings. This is a one-time set and forget. So this next area of configuration is something that you need to be mindful of every time you want to operate with digital, and that's why I think this field card is going to be very important for the operators that step away from it. And this is part of the reasons why I personally don't care for the 891, is that this is overly complex. So the first thing you're going to want to do is pick the band you want to operate on, select your frequency, and then we're going to hold down the band button, do a long press there, and then use the VFO knob to put that into data mode. Okay, so once that's done, the next big issue you're going to run into when you fire up your software, you may see that you're only seeing a small sliver of the digital traffic, and that's because the radio is not configured for wide bandwidth of 3 kilohertz. So what you want to do is do a short press of the function key multiple times, and my field card goes over that. And you want to wait till you get to the menu. It's called function-1 that has the width there. And then you just want to use the multi-function knob on the bottom left, press it in, and then you want to adjust that to 3000 kilohertz by rotating it. And you have to make sure you do this almost every time. It's a real pain in the butt. So the other thing I like to do, since I use this a lot for digital data mode, is when you're in that function 1 button, hold down and long press the A key until it beeps, and now in my display I have quick access anytime I need to set the width, which is very often. So just a pro tip. The last pro tip I'll have for you, and again, I'm not really a pro because I'm not a huge fan of this radio, is going back into the global function menu with a long press and go down to 16-03, and that's HF power. This is the power setting for digital data mode. There's a different power for sideband operation, which is retarded in my opinion. And I'll set that to either 5, 10, or 20 watts depending on conditions. So the nice thing about the menu system there is when you do a short press to get out of that global menu, anytime you do a long press, it actually remembers that's where you left off. So this is a quick way to just adjust the power. So I have easy access to the width using the programmable key on the bottom. I assign mine to A, and then I have a relatively quick way to change the power. Again, these are just my personal preferences on how I do things. All right, so this next section is important, and it's specific to the way that I operate and interface my radio with my computer. I'm running Ubuntu Linux right now, and I do have the hamlib library installed as well as JSACall. So I just want to show you how all of this works. So the first thing that I want to do is make sure that I'm able to figure out what device, which serial device in the Windows world, this is called a COM port, is connected. So I'm going to type in sudo dmessage dash, I believe it's W, I have that on my field card, and we're going to hit enter. And then we're going to enter in our password. Okay, so we're going to plug this in, and that command is going to tell us what device we actually, or what devices we need to look for. So you can see that a few devices have been actually detected here, and what you're looking for is a line that is CP210X, and then towards the end you'll see a device number of like TTY USB. 2 of them were detected in my case, 4 and 5. I have found that it's typically the first one. So we need that bit of information. And I've got that in the field card on how to do that basic operation. The next one is I like to use the rig control daemon that comes with hamlib, and this is something that I run in the background. And per the field card, to make this work with the 891 and the DigiRig, all it is sudo rig control D-M, and then the device ID for the 891, it is 1036. And then we use -R and specify the device. In our case, it's /dev/ and then that identifier that we found in the previous command. In our case, it's TTY USB 4. And then the dash S here, lowercase s, is the baud rate. And again, that lines up to the baud rate we configured in that menu initially in the radio, and it's set to 38400. And then the dash capital P is how it triggers basically push to talk, which is rig. For all of the other DigiRigs, I've always used RTS, so this is different in comparison. So we're gonna hit enter there, and it may ask you for your password. Now, one cool thing about this, I'll tell you, is that now that that's running, we can actually use in another window the rig control command without the D at the end, -M and the number 2. The number 2 is a special identifier here. And if we've done this correctly, you should see rig command pop up, and you can actually start talking to the radio directly. So for example, lowercase f will show us the frequency that's currently on the VFO, and it's accurate. It just printed out 70788 or 78000. So good to know. We could also change the frequency as well with a capital F. We're not going to get into it. So I'm just basically going to type Q to quit. So we've got this radio now configured to talk to the computer using the Hamlib rig control daemon. And my future software, MCOM Tools, does all of this behind the scenes for you. So this is kind of the sneak peek of what happens behind the scenes. So I've got another field card. The other important part is more than just controlling your radio, is getting audio in and out. That's kind of the what makes digital data modes work, is working with audio going in and out. So there is a command called ALSA mixer. And again, the field card basically says we're going to go ahead and press F6. And for the DigiRig, it's always going to be presented as USB audio codec. Then we're going to press F5 to see all of the values. And then I've got a dope card in here and the settings for what we need to do to consult them. So yeah, speakers should be 27. So if someone has an issue hearing your signal, this is going to be the setting that needs to be manipulated. And the way I think about it is, I'm talking to you, I'm projecting my voice. If you can't hear me, I'm not speaking loud enough. So the speaker controls your outbound audio, and that basically will dictate how well another station can hear you. Don't crank it up too high because you can overdrive your audio. Mic, I found that it really doesn't do anything. I always keep it at, I think I have it here as 37. And then the capture, the left-right capture, I found for the DigiRig and almost all of the radios I use, 19 is the perfect value. So if you have issues decoding, this is the value that you want to manipulate. And then you want to have the audio gain control muted, and you can just toggle the M button for that one. So audio settings are done, hit escape to exit. Now, one thing to note is that when you exit and reconnect this later, the audio settings in ALSA Mixer get reset. There's a way to persist it, but I'm not going to get into that now. My software does all of that. So just want to walk you guys through all of the basic settings first. All right, guys, last up, I went ahead and connected an antenna to the 891, and we're going to go ahead and fire up JS8 call. So a couple things. I like to use, like I said, the rig control daemon. I know other people either manually configure it or use, I forget the other fancy tool that people are using these days. All right, so I just cleared the screen, and this just happened, which is very good. You'll notice here that I've got this little area in the waterfall that's in blue. It's not taking up the 3 kilohertz bandwidth, so we got to check our width on the radio and make sure that it is enabled, the WDH, and it's set to 3000, and that we're also in the data mode of operation. So you want to make sure that if you bind the width option to your programmable key, in my case the A key, that it's actually highlighted in black. That will toggle it on and off, so now you can actually see that the waterfall is showing and reading everything. So that's the first thing we want. Next thing we're going to do is head on over to our settings, and we'll take a look at the radio. And what you want here for rig is Hamlib net rig control. So make sure you have that set as the option, and it's going to talk to that little service that we started on the command line. And you want to go over to cat control, and you want to make sure that the network server is set to localhost 5432, and that's the default port that the rig control command line tool that we launched will use. And then for rig options, you want that set to cat. So we can go ahead here now and test cat, and that should work. So we're good to go there. For audio, it's fairly simple. This applies to all of the DigiRigs regardless, and you're gonna wanna make sure that the input is set to ALSA input, and then pick the C media USB audio device, and then for output, you're gonna want the output that's also ALSA output, USB C media, USB audio device. And that's pretty much it. So at this point, we should be getting activity on our waterfall if there is any, and we should be able to do something like a heartbeat. While I do that, you'll also notice here on the bottom left in green, the audio levels are perfect. And like I said, based on the audio settings I configured on this radio, using the ALSA mixer settings, I have found that to be almost perfect for just about every DigiRig I use. So let's send a heartbeat out. We're basically going to be transmitting here in about 2 seconds. So anyways, guys, that is really all there is to it. You can actually see there's a few stations starting to come back to me, and they'll be populating the waterfall. So yeah, doing pretty well with this setup. And again, this video really is not meant to be a general purpose video for everybody. It's intended for people that have an 891, want a single cable USB interface, and are considering something like DigiRig's DR-891. All of the other configuration is very specific to how I set up my system. It will be different a little bit on Windows and different depending on the software that you use, but that's how I do it. And again, this video is primarily intended for my Buy Me a Coffee audience that will be using the software that I'm releasing very slowly over the coming months. And then also for me, I'm going to actually download and save this video for myself, as well as my field cards, laminate them, and put them in my 891 kit. So if I ever need to, I can consult the field cards and consult this video. All right, guys, I'm the Tech Prepper. Be strong, be safe, and be prepared.